Mabuting araw, I am Doreen Loriaga Gonzalez, one of the presenter for Chapter 3, Contemporary Development in Public Administration. Joining with me as my co-presenters are Mr. Enver Cortez and Ms. Myla Del Rosario. The main objective of the discussion is to understand the contemporary developments in the discipline, to comprehend the paradigm shift in the discipline, and to dwell on the new approaches to public administration. New public administration is defined as a new and qualitatively different phase in the growth of public administration, infused with political values like equity, social justice, change, and commitment. The history of new public administration started in 1968 during the path-breaking conference at the Minobrook Conference 1 at Syracuse University. It was a wake-up call for theorists and practitioners alike to make discipline socially relevant and accountable. Also held during a turbulent time and marked by a series of contemporary developments like social upheavals in the form of ethnic skirmishes across the American cities, campus clashes, Vietnam War and its repercussions in American society, and the like. The above developments, coupled with a deep sense of dissatisfaction among the practitioners regarding the present state of the discipline, especially its obsession with efficiency and economy, had ushered in a qualitative improved phase in public administration, subsequently christened as NPA or New Public Administration. Due to the increase in public interest and the continued dissatisfaction with the state who practices the current discipline of public administration, scholars who attended were busy chalking out the boundary of the discipline. These are the highlights of Minobrook Conference 1 in 1968. Social equity has been added to efficiency and economy as the rationale or justification for policy positions. A responsive government both grows where new needs are clear and declines where agency services are no longer critical. On the other hand, new public management can also be defined as new set of experiments in public sector management informed with the market principles of efficiency and economy to make ailing public sector effective. In sum, it portrays an image of public administration informed with minimum government, bureaucratization, decentralization, market orientation of public services, contracting out, privatization, performance measurement, and so on. According to Christopher Hood, the emergence of NPM or New Public Management can be traced back to administrative reform measures in the West. To be more specific, in the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development or OECD group. Christopher Hood has shown the emergence of NPM was coincided with four administrative megatrends. One, it attempts to slow down or reverse government growth in terms of overt public spending and staffing. Number two, the shift towards privatization and quasi-privatizations and away from core government institutions with renewed emphasis on subsidiary in service provision. Number three, the development of automation, particularly in IT and in the production and distribution of public services. And lastly, the development of a more international agenda, increasingly focused on general issues of public management, policy design, decision styles, and intergovernmental cooperation. Christopher Hood listed seven essential doctrines of NPM. Number one, hands-on professional management in public sector. It seeks to dole out extra ounce of professional manager like freedom to public sector. Number two, explicit standards and measures of performance. NPM is in favor of laying out explicit parameters of performance. In other words, you should be defining of the goals, targets, and indicators to be clearly expressed. Number three, greater emphasis on output controls. NPM stresses on results rather than procedure. Number four, shift to disaggregation of units in public sector. NPM is proposed to break up formerly monolithic structures in the public sector into manageable units. Number five, shift to greater competition in public sector. NPM, on principle, is in favor of infusing competitive spirit among public sector enterprise, where competition brings down the cost of product, service, and ensures efficiency. Number six, stress on private sector styles of management practice. NPM lays emphasis on proven private sector management tools in order to salvage ailing public sector. And lastly, NPM stress on greater discipline and parsimony in resource use. NPM is sought to impose greater discipline and economy in resource utilization by adopting a series of steps, namely cutting direct costs, raising labor discipline, resisting union demands, limiting compliance costs to business, and so on. According to Nicholas Henry, another expert in NPM, there are five fundamentals that the government should follow. Number one, alertness. Government should improvise the problem and act before it actually hit the system, not the other way around. Agility. Government should be agile in the sense that it should be entrepreneurial, open, and communicative. Adaptability. Government should be continuously engaged in improving quality of its programs and services and thereby adjusting with demands. Number four, alignment. Government should collaborate with other government, non-governmental, and civil society organizations to achieve social goals. And last is government should be accountable. Government should have a clear and compelling mission that focuses on the needs of the people. These are the salient features of the new public management: revamping of organizational structure, empowerment of citizens, greater autonomy for public sector manager, application of rigorous performance measurement technique, disaggregation of public bureaucracy, cost cutting, goal orientation, use of quasi markets and contracting out technique, emphasis on managerial support service, and organizational and spatial decentralization. Theory and practice of governance. Governance is the manner in which power is exercised. Governance is all about the capacity of the public authority and its accountability. So, two keywords of governance is capacity and accountability. Capacity includes the state's hardware, financial resources, the infrastructures, and effectiveness in executing policy decision. While the accountability, on the other hand, is the software, the competence of the public authority. It is linked with performance. So combining the two, governance is another mode of conceptualizing public administration in the continuously changing global scenario. There is no definite meaning of governance in the International Encyclopedia of the Social Sciences. Based on Webster's New Universal Unabridged Dictionary 1979, governance generally means the act or process of governing, specifically authoritative direction and control. To be more precise, governance can be further defined as the political direction and control exercised over the actions of the members to its citizens. According to World Bank 1992b, Chapter 27, there are four key elements of good governance. Number one is public sector management. Number two, accountability. Number three, legal framework for development. And lastly, the information and transparency. And also, according to the World Bank, some of the main symptoms of poor governance are as follows: failure to make a clear separation between what is public and what is private, hence a tendency to divert public resources for private gain. Failure to establish a predictable framework of law and government behavior conducive to development, or arbitrariness in the application of rules and laws. Excessive rules, regulations, licensing requirements, and so forth, which impede the functioning of markets and encourage rent seeking. Priorities inconsistent with development, resulting in a misallocation of resources. And finally, the excessively narrowly based on non-transparent decision making. Further, according to United Nations Development Program or UNDP, there are 8 major characteristics of a good governance. Number 1, participation. Participation by both men and women is a key cornerstone of good governance. Number 2, rule of law. Good governance requires fair legal frameworks that are enforced impartially. It is also requires full protection of human rights, particularly those of minorities. Number 3, transparency. Transparency means that decisions taken and their enforcement are done in a manner that follows rules and regulations. It is also means that information is freely available and directly accessible to those who will be affected by such decisions and their enforcement. Number 4, responsiveness. Good governance requires that institutions and process try to serve all stakeholders within a reasonable time frame. Consensus oriented. Good governance requires mediation of the different interests in society to reach a broad consensus in society on what is in the best interest of the whole community and how this can be achieved. Equity and inclusiveness. A society's well-being depends on ensuring that all of its members feel that they have a stake in it and do not feel excluded from the mainstream of society. Accountability. Accountability is a key requirement of good governance, not only governmental institutions, but also the private sector and civil society organizations must be accountable to the public and to their institutional stakeholders. Strategic vision. Leaders and the public have a broad and long-term perspective on good governance and human development, along with a sense of what is needed for such development. The purpose of the present discussion is to clearly bring out these implications by placing public administration within the framework of contemporary globalization process and discourse. There is almost universal recognition today of the urgent need for realignment of a country's public administrative system, but the direction and contents of reform are far from clear. This concludes my discussion. May I turn over the floor to Mr. Cortez as the next presenter. Maraming salamat po.
My name is Ever Cortez, and I'll be reporting the second part of our presentation. My topics include historical roots of governance, theoretical adequate in addressing the radical metamorphosis of public administration, both in the developed and developing countries. So one can thus safely argue that while the 20th century was the age of organization where bureaucracy symbolized the core values of public administration, the 21st century has ushered in an era of network-based organization drawn on neoliberal values. So, the distinction between public and private administration does not appear to be critical in conceptualizing public administration. Citizens are customers, and those involved in public administration are functionaries seeking to approximate the corporate culture. Accountability in public bureaucracy is ascertained not only internally, but also through various external agencies, including Citizens Charter and the likes. Public administration is now governance, which is nothing but checklist of certain activities designed both to stabilize and also consolidate neoliberalism. So that's the broader concept of my topic of the historical roots of governance. So for the second topic, it's the theoretical roots of governance. Conceptually, governance is linked with the ideological triumph of neoliberalism. So theoretical roots of governance are located in the neoliberal economic theories, especially in the new right ideology. So government is redefined in market paradigms by redrawing boundaries of public administration. So in the dispensation of governance, in the new dispensation, governance is an interface between the state, the market, and the society. Former has been primarily concerned with the promotion of individual legitimate government. is in the eye of the beholder. Subjective theory of value. That's what it is. We'll be focusing on the thoughts of Hayek, who was the most influential Austrian with his wide-ranging contribution to political philosophy and scientific methodology. So, relevant writings of Hayek include The Road to Serfdom, The Fatal Illusion, Law, Legislation, and Liberty, and Constitution of Liberty, among others. So, these major themes that recur in his thoughts are the following. Society is a spontaneous order. As evolved, spontaneous order is preferred by a planned society. Liberty has instrumental value because it makes best use of widely dispensed knowledge and provides for the unpredictable growth of knowledge, allowing individuals to experiment with new ideas and techniques. Number three would be socialism is undemocratic and impossible. What will be produced is determined by a few and not by the mass of consumers. So there's no agreed common purpose in society. The recognition of private property and the rules of contracts exist to enable individuals to pursue their own goals and not to reach common goals, right? So as regards to planning, socialist planning has no way of predicting consumer demand without the role of prices. The planner does not know rationality in government's decision-making process. organization, not anchored solely by its foundation, which was established years before. So it's an evolving organization, and it catches up with um, uh, the needs of the people. So lastly would be to redefine the relationship between the state and the citizen. The citizen actually is the client or the customer. So the citizens in return have to pay the price for the services that they use, thus taxes. Governance is thus a mechanical act governed by not any political ideal but by the market, where the satisfaction of the client is always prior to any other considerations. That is why when we are doing our jobs in public service, we are giving out client satisfaction surveys, because that client satisfaction survey dictates how we do our processes and how we should adjust based on the needs of our people. Public administration in the dispensation is just a mechanism of delivery of public services in an efficient and in effective way, with a smile to the individual customers, rejecting the role of political ideals in its distribution. So, on the other hand, politics lies in choosing what services to deliver, in which services should be prioritized. So, it's a matter of having the political will. That's the term. It implies nothing about how to deliver it, though. So, it just says that prioritization of projects, but when you implement the project, it goes to governance, right? So, and public administration. So, public administration as a management misses altogether the overarching perspective of democratic quality, sustained capacity of the political system for collective action, effective leadership or effective citizenship, and developing and nurturing civic infrastructure for protecting citizens' rights and promoting collective life are vital significance for any public administration in a democracy. So basically, that's the idea of the topic governance and nation state. Last topic that I would be discussing would be the digital and e-governance. In the context of globalization, the recent conceptualization of e-governance or digital governance is of significance to the administrative reforms, especially now that we have entered into and went beyond the crisis and the pandemic period. Drawn on the latest ICT, the aim of e-governance is to open up government processes and enable greater public access to information. Both digital and e-governance are of recent origin, and there's hardly any universally accepted definition for the terms. However, digital and e-governance refer to the use of emerging ICT like internet, web page, mobile phones to deliver information and services to the people. It can include publication ways that we have with improvements of some digital innovations and digital platforms, such as this platform to hold our classes. But then again, for the leadership, it's not desirable option to fully implement the e-governance system unless there's no other option available. That maybe in the next few years, we can find ways on how to fully transition to e-governance and online management system. But then again, as of now, since the Philippines is still a developing country, we have still we still need to implement the traditional way of delivering basic services and the traditional way of reaching our people who are most needing of our services. So anyway, that ends my presentation. Again, in behalf of our group, I would like to thank you for your time and attention. And I'll be turning the floor over to our next presenter. So thank you very much and good day.
Feminist perspective on public policy and administration. When we talk about public policy and administration, what often comes to our mind is that it is dominated by men. Women were not given equal opportunities, and some may say they were doomed to fail. However, throughout the years, advocacy on women's rights and gender equality gained attention. The feminist perspective. What is a feminist perspective? It aims to understand the nature of gender inequality and examines women's social roles, experiences, and interests. It focuses on the promotion of women's welfare. The major objective of feminists is to engender public administration, which according to them is the bastion of male chauvinism. The feminist perspective seeks to access the role of public administration, especially of bureaucracy, public policy, and so on, through a gendered lens. However, a caveat seems to be in order at the outset, as feminism is neither a homogeneous ideology seeking to undo the injustices perpetrated against women, nor a homogeneous group which unanimously advocates women's cause. In fact, on the contrary, there are innumerable shades and contours in feminism, which negate any generalized position as such. Only one common thread that distinguishes feminist position from the rest is its uncompromising stand on gender equity and gender justice. Camilla Stibers writes, feminist theories of public administration then use gender as a lens through which to analyze critically women's current status and role in public agencies, bring to light ways in which gender bias inhabits ideas and practices in the field, and formulate new theoretical approaches. Camilla Stibers is a scholar and professor of public administration, well known for her contributions in the field of urban studies and public service. The feminist perspective of public administration sought to interrogate the structural inequality embedded in public institutions and values. They have two major arguments. Public administration has been instrumental in systematically excluding women from the purview of public space on the pretext of biology. And number two, patriarchal society, public institutions, bureaucracy, and so on are nothing but the structure of subordination, as patriarchal values are entrenched in those institutions. Therefore, To bring about gender equality, as they have suggested, attempts should be made to dislodge patriarchy from the above institutions. The main thesis of Camille Schreiber's Gender Images in Public Administration is that images of professional expertise, management, leadership, and public virtue that mark justifications of administration power contain dilemmas of gender. They not only have features commonly and unthinkably associated with masculinity, but they also help to keep in place or bestow political and economic privilege on the bearers of masculine qualities at the expense of those who display culturally feminine ones. Far from being superficial window dressing or a side effect, the character masculinity of public administration, though far from monolithic, is systemic. It contributes to and is sustained by power relations in society at large that distribute resources on the basis of gender and affect people's life chances and their sense of themselves and their place in the world. Looking at public administration through the lens of gender, its public dimensions are revealed as a gendered rather than neutral. Public administrations involves the discretionary exercise of public power, and we expect public power to justify itself. Typically, this is accomplished by reference to redeeming features such as the public interest dimensions of administrative decision-making, the expertise that is said to serve the public good, the debt management skills that make possible the accomplishment of public purposes, and the necessity for administrative leadership in the era of post-industrial complexity. But this publicness is problematic because it is grounded in a historical understanding of the public sphere as a male preserve, distinct from the domestic realm that has been the primary life space and responsibility of women. Thus, women have been excluded from the public sphere, which is dominated by male. Throughout history, women have been expected to handle needs related to sustenance and nurturance in order that men could have time and energy for public pursuits. This division of labor persists today despite equal opportunity and affirmative action policies which have simply enabled women to shoulder both household and paid work rather than to share them equally with men. And despite recommendations for shared parenting, which are honored more in the breach than in the observance. In recent years, several theories have suggested that the nature of the boundary between the public and private spheres is itself debatable. That is a political issue. Stivers argues that if it is so, the justice of household arrangement can become a matter of public deliberation. According to Stivers, like other public service activities, public administration is structurally masculine despite its apparent neutrality and presence of increasing numbers of women in federal, state, and local governments. It can go on as it does with business as usual because women bear a lopsided share of the burden of domestic functions without which life would simply not be possible. To sum up, feminist theory is critical of the existing reality. It views women's historical exclusion from certain human pursuits such as politicals and confinement to others such as homemaking, if not always deliberate on the part of individual men, certainly not natural. Feminists argue that such arrangements make women more likely than men to encounter neglected perspectives and to ask submerged questions about the terms and characteristics of our common existence. Feminists are in general agreement that to be a feminist means to bring up these left out or ignored ideas. According to Stivers, feminist theory sees that barrier between public and private, erected ostensibly to protect the freedom of all, as supportive of the oppression of many. In a space constructed out of the exclusion of half the human race, as long as this exclusion remains unexamined, no heroism of practice is possible. The most important thing, in order to change the present situation, is to be conscious of the need to sing different tunes from ones currently in the repertoire.
Corporate governance. What is a corporate governance? It is a system of rules, practices, and processes by which an entity is directed and controlled. It is considered to be a necessary precondition of free market economy. Simply put, corporate governance presupposes a code of conduct for the corporate sector or corporate discipline. The subject of corporate governance came to business limelight from relative obscurity after a string of collapses of high-profile companies. The Enron, the Houston, WorldCom, and Telecom behemoths shocked the business world with both the scale and age of their unethical and illegal operation. It was clear that something was amiss in the area of corporate governance all over the world. Since then, corporate governance has become a new buzzword of corporate boardrooms across the globe. It is considered to be a necessary precondition of free market economy. Simply put, corporate governance, as I have said, it presupposes a code of conduct for the corporate sector or corporate discipline. The need for self-imposed disciplinary regime is embedded in the very nature of human beings. Man, by nature, is insatiable and prone to human frailties like corruption, misuse of power, and position for personal benefit, nepotism, and so on. It is considered to be a necessary precondition of free market. Keeping the house in order is perhaps at the heart of corporate governance. It can be defined as the sum total of processes and structures involved in the process of governing a corporation with an underlying objective of ensuring transparency, accountability, innovation, and social responsibility. If there is no check and balance, those who are in authority will use their power. Hence, good governance is an imperative for business corporations across the world. Here are the important features of corporate governance. It helps to ensure that an adequate and appropriate system of controls operates within a company and hence assets may be safeguarded. It prevents any single individual having too powerful and influential, because when you're in the power, sometimes you'll be corrupted. It is concerned also with the relationship between a company's management, the board of directors, shareholders, and other stakeholders. It aims to ensure that the company is managed in the best interest of the shareholders and other stakeholders. It aims to ensure that the company is managed in the best interest of the shareholders and other stakeholders, and it tries to encourage both transparency and accountability, which investors are increasingly looking for, both corporate management and corporate performance. Corporate governance is the system by which business corporations are directed and controlled. The corporate governance structure specifies the distribution of rights and responsibilities among different participants in corporation, such as the board, the managers, the shareholders, and stakeholders, and spells out the rules and procedures for making decisions in corporate affairs. By doing this, it also provides a structure through which the company objectives are set and the means of attaining those objectives and monitoring performance. Therefore, it can be conceptualized as inclusive of the structures, process, cultures, and systems through which the company sets out its objectives and defines the means of attaining those objectives and monitoring its performance. From the above definition, it is clear that some kind of disciplinary or accountability regime is necessary to counter dubious corporate practices. But how that disciplinary regime can be put in practice is not very clear. The legal or regulatory framework, which otherwise happens to be a powerful instrument of reclaiming obedience, cannot be a very feasible option of governing corporations. On the contrary, it calls for ethical obligation on the part of the stakeholders in a company. Corporate governance has put lot of emphasis on ethical dimension of compliance for at least two reasons. First, a corporation by nature is a semi-autonomous body which is governed by its own institution, constitution, or statute. Therefore, forcing a company to comply even in certain accountability parameters is nothing but a hostile inroad into its autonomy. Second, any legal framework of binding nature is impossible for the sheer magnitude of big national or transnational corporations. Hence, corporate governance does not rely on legal framework alone. Corporate governance cannot be reduced to any single principle or criteria. It includes a host of principles. The major components of corporate governance can be enumerated as transparency, leadership, internal controls, accountability, boardroom composition and structure, boardroom appraisal, development of boards, performance-based executive pay, and code of ethics. Leadership. It is the most important component of corporate governance. Good leadership in a company includes, among other, providing proper direction to the enterprise, designing strategies of innovation, organization structuring, strategic management, stakeholders management, evaluation, and monitoring performance. The accountability. It is an important hallmark of corporate governance, considered to be the bedrock of corporate governance. Effective accountability has two components: answerability and consequence. Answerability is a requirement for public officials to respond periodically to questions concerning how they use their authority, where their resources went, and what was achieved with them. Second, there is a need for predictable and meaningful consequences. A corporation should remain accountable to shareholders. The transparency, it is associated part of accountability. It includes, among other, proper financial reporting, disclosure of executive remuneration package, and so on. Boardroom appraisal, developing the boards, the code of ethics, performance-based executive pay. Why corporate governance is important? It is important because it creates a system of rules and practices that determines how a company operates and how it aligns the interests of all its stakeholders. Good corporate governance leads to ethical business practices, which leads to financial viability. In turn, that can attract investors. Environmental governance in the Philippines. What is environmental governance in the Philippines? The governance of the environment extends beyond the boundaries of the nation-state or of local subdivisions. Environmental governance aims for the sustainable use of natural resources and centers participatory arrangement to ensure the welfare of the populations who rely and use these resources. Natural resources and their management play an important role in the development of the Philippines. The environment and natural resource sector, or the ENR, is a key pillar in the country's economy, with agriculture, fisheries, and forestry representing about 10% of the gross domestic product and 30% of employment. The sustenance of the Philippines' unique and sensitive ecosystem with its natural assets that make its habitats and coastal areas both attractive and a large contributor to revenue generation is threatened by enormous pollution and environmental degradation, which is exacerbated by climate change-induced impacts and risks from natural disasters. Key milestones in environment governance in the Philippines. The emergence of community-based approaches to natural resource management in the mid-1970s was the beginning of environment governance in the Philippines. Community-based resource management was a means to address the accelerated loss in forest cover, depletion of fishery resources, degradation of coastal environment, loss in species and biodiversity, together with loss of livelihood and displacement of communities. Thereon, environmental management has been influenced by political and leadership paradigms with the evolution of regulation and environment policies to manage forestry, fishery, and protected areas through the use of multiple tools and strategies including command and control instruments and civil society response. The DENR is the policy-making arm of the national government in forestry and wildlife management. The function of managing fishery and coastal resources is shared with DA, the Department of Agriculture, through the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. The DENR, to the Parks and Wild Bureau, is in charge of managing protected area sites in the Philippines. From the 1980s, central government agencies included NGOs in policy implementation such as the management of the national government's socially oriented forestry and coastal resource management projects. Slight movements in environmental policy are noted, but monitoring of environmental compliance remains weak. National ambient air quality for particular matter measuring 10 micrometers in diameter or smaller improved over the last 5 years. This is a result of effective management of air quality in strategic areas in the country, including close monitoring of industries and stricter implementation of anti-smoking belching campaign. However, pollutant sources continue to increase, in particular the rapidly growing number of privately owned vehicles. Imagine, 44% increase from 2006 to 2015, which remains the largest contributor of emissions in the country. With respect to water quality, many of the classified water bodies are unfit for their intended uses. Approximately, only 5% of households are connected to sewerage network and treatment facilities. Despite sufficient rules and regulation for the protection, proper management, and sustainable use of resources, Their implementation and enforcement are constrained by weak and fragmented institutional arrangement. For instance, while the Laguna Lake development is responsible for the protection and development of Laguna Lake, regulation of other sources of pollutants such as household and industrial wastes are essential to maintain the lake's water quality. However, these functions are the mandate of LGUs or other agencies and out of the jurisdiction of the LLDA. Although the Philippines has a strong institutional framework that mandates public participation in environmental concerns, persisting constraints to implementation and policy enforcement remain. Engagement of civil society organizations across multiple levels has significantly influenced environmental policies and programs. Although public participation in policymaking is high, it continues to remain weak in monitoring, enforcement, and implementation, particularly in challenging violations of environmental legal provisions, either by government or by private entities. CSO participation remains contingent on state priorities, leading to shortfalls in inclusion. These weaknesses are also largely due to the lack of institutional mechanism to foster mutual learning among CSOs through dialogue and consensus building, leading to fragmentation between them. This fragmentation allows vested state interests to dominate and affects collaborative governance, in particular on the boundaries of environment matters and displacement of people. The NGOs, the non-government organization, and the CSOs, civil society organization, can overcome this challenge by improving their partnership with the government and communities by first developing harmonized frameworks among themselves for public deliberation such that informed sexual decisions can be taken on critical and persisting environmental issues. If we do not take care of our environment rather, and there is no effective environmental governance, there would be nothing left for our future.